Frank Costello, born Francesco Castiglia on January 26, 1891, in Loro Poli, Italy, became one of the most influential crime bosses in the United States. His life spanned several cities and is deeply intertwined with the rise of organized crime in the early 20th century. Costello was known as the Prime Minister of the Underworld due to his political connections and his preference for a more diplomatic approach to mob leadership compared to violent methods. Below is a detailed account of his life and criminal activities in various cities. New York City, the beginning and rise to power. Costello immigrated with his family to the United States when he was just 4 years old, settling in East Harlem, New York City. Like many immigrant families of the time, the Castiglias faced poverty, which pushed Frank into a life of petty crime at a young age. In his teenage years, he joined a local gang and started engaging in theft and assault. Early criminal enterprises. By the 1910s, Frank Costello was deeply involved in criminal activities, including bootlegging during Prohibition. His first arrest came in 1908 for assault and robbery. After a brief stint in prison, he took the surname Costello to assimilate and avoid drawing attention as a recent immigrant. Over the next few years, he expanded his criminal activities and made important connections with future mafia heavyweights such as Charlene, Lucky, Luciano, and Meyer Lansky. The Prohibition era, 1920s. During Prohibition, Costello became heavily involved in bootlegging, running liquor through a vast network in New York City. He worked alongside Luciano and Lansky, eventually helping to form the National Crime Syndicate, an alliance of mafia families and Jewish gangs that controlled organized crime throughout the U.S. By the late 1920s, Costello was a powerful figure in New York's underworld, often acting as a mediator between feuding factions. He built an empire not just through violence, but through his deep political connections, notably in Tammany Hall, New York's democratic political machine. Rise to leadership. After the Castellammarese War of 1931, which left many mafia bosses dead or imprisoned, Luciano became the head of the newly formed commission, a governing body for the mafia. Costello became Luciano's trusted consigliere, handling the political aspects of the organization. He avoided the bloody factional wars, preferring influence through bribery and control of labor unions. Chicago and the national influence. Though Frank Costello primarily operated out of New York, his influence spread across the country. He had dealings with powerful mafia figures in Chicago, especially Al Capone's Chicago outfit. Costello and Capone were not rivals, but rather collaborators in organized crime activities, particularly in the Prohibition-era liquor trade. Miami, the expansion into gambling. In the 1940s, Costello expanded into Miami, where he built a significant gambling empire. Costello's operations in Miami were extensive, as he partnered with other mobsters to establish casinos and illegal betting operations. He used his political connections to protect his interests in Florida, where he could relax during his semi-retirement years. However, Costello's operations in Florida were kept relatively low-profile compared to his activities in New York. Las Vegas. Building the gambling empire. Costello, like other organized crime figures, saw the potential in Las Vegas as a gambling mecca. Although he didn't play as prominent a role in Las Vegas as Benjamin Bugsy Siegel or Meyer Lansky, Costello was involved in the financing of several casinos through his connections in New York and Chicago. Criminal activity and murders. While Costello was not known for being as violent as other mafia bosses like Albert Anastasia or Vito Genovese, he was certainly involved in several murders, either directly or indirectly. Costello maintained a preference for avoiding bloodshed when possible, relying on his political and financial influence. However, his rise to power in New York's underworld likely involved the elimination of rivals, though he largely delegated violent tasks to subordinates. His role in orchestrating crimes was mainly behind the scenes, involving bribery and control over unions rather than direct killings. Attempted assassination and downfall, 1957. By the 1950s, Costello's control began to wane. In 1957, Vito Genovese, a rival within the mafia, sought to take over Costello's operations. On May 2, 1957, Costello survived an assassination attempt when a hitman, Vincent Chin Giganti, shot him in the head outside his Manhattan apartment. The bullet only grazed Costello's scalp, and he survived, famously saying, "I didn't hear the bullet." This attempt, however, marked the beginning of Costello's decline. Although he survived the attack, he saw the writing on the wall and officially stepped down from his leadership role. Genovese took control of the family, which would later be renamed the Genovese crime family. Trials and imprisonment. In the 1950s, Costello faced increased scrutiny from the U.S. government. His lavish lifestyle and political connections drew attention from law enforcement and congressional investigators. Costello famously testified during the Kefauver hearings on organized crime in 1951, although he refused to answer many questions. His voice became famous due to the broadcast of the hearings, but Costello's face was never shown, as cameras only focused on his hands. In 1954, Costello was convicted of tax evasion and sentenced to 5 years in prison. Though he continued to influence the mafia from behind bars, his power was significantly diminished. Semi-retirement and death. After serving his prison term, Costello largely retired from active involvement in the mafia, though he remained a respected elder statesman within the criminal world. He lived out his final years in relative peace, spending time between New York and his properties in Florida. Frank Costello died of a heart attack on February 18, 1973 in Manhattan. Unlike many mobsters of his era, Costello died a natural death, a testament to his skill in navigating the dangerous world of organized crime without relying heavily on violence. Frank Costello has been the subject of various documentaries and media portrayals, most notably in Ken Burns' PBS documentary series, Prohibition, and The Making of the Mob, New York. These documentaries emphasize his intelligence, political connections, and influence over both the criminal underworld and legitimate society. In interviews and archival footage, historians have noted Costello's rare ability to transition between both the criminal and political worlds, earning him the nickname Prime Minister among mobsters. The attempted assassination on Costello is often highlighted in documentaries as a key turning point in the history of the mafia. His survival and decision to step down without further bloodshed reflect his more diplomatic approach to leadership. Frank Costello's life is a fascinating example of how organized crime operated across multiple American cities, integrating itself into the fabric of society through political influence, financial maneuvering, and calculated violence. His life ended quietly, but his legacy as one of the most powerful mafia figures in American history remains strong. Thanks for tuning into Sika True Crime Docs. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more captivating tales. Your support helps us keep bringing these stories to life. See you in the next episode.